Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second cantorial tribute evening, which I hope will now become an annual event at Edgware United Synagogue in the run-up to the Yamim Noraim. It is entirely appropriate that we hold this event in the month of Elul before the High Holy Days, since it is designated as a month of introspection and repentance in preparation for Rosh Hashanah. We are currently reciting daily Psalm 27 with the verse, Oshira v'azamra l'Hashem, Shema Hashem kol yekro. I will sing and chant praises to the Lord. Lord, hear my voice when I call. The pre-festival music will reach its climax at the midnight hour this coming Motzi Shabbos with the uplifting Salicha services, many of which will involve stimulating and moving chazanut. On Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, this synagogue, alongside all other synagogues, will witness the year's highest attendances, and whether the congregants are regulars or 3 times a year attendees, they will know exactly what melodies to expect, the most obvious one being Max Bruch's Kol Nidre. But they will also be familiar with other sacred cantorial music, some of which we call Messinai melodies, not literally from the Middle East, but venerated as if they had been received with Matan Torah, the giving of the law. They were in fact developed in the Rhineland in the 12th to the 15th centuries and rank among the highest achievements of Ashkenazi music. Including among these are the Rosh Hashanah Aleinu and the Ne'ilah Kaddish. Moving to the 19th and early 20th centuries, those who come in frequently during the year will instinctively know Zaltzer's En Kamocha when we open the Ark on a Shabbos morning, and without knowing who the composer was, they will be able to sing and appreciate compositions by Louis Lewandowski, Julius Mombach, and Samuel Ullman. My friends, after 800 years of tradition, we sacrifice the sublime, authentic cantorial music at our peril. No one would pretend that the best of Chazanot is easy listening and does not need concerted attention, but by making the effort, we can be richly rewarded. Tonight, I hope we can reflect that traditional Chazanut and correct Nusach exist as the genomic imprint of every Jew. From Kurt Weill and Leonard Bernstein, through Richard Tucker and Jan Pearce and Jolson, with Yossler Rosenblatt making a personal appearance in his 1927 film, The Jazz Singer, and in Lionel Bart's Oliver, we hear the unique influences of our traditional music. Rabbi Geoffrey Shisler would call on sons, a brother and a grandson of some of the finest Chazanim of the post-war era to talk about the cantors in their families and ask each of them to choose a favourite cantorial piece. May we all be inspired by our rich musical heritage through the wonderful selections that we shall hear tonight.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is a delight to see you again. I say again because some of you will recall that we did a similar evening last year when we had 4 Chazanim and their children speaking about them. This year we have 5. Probably next year we'll have 6. But I can assure you you're in for a very interesting and very, very enjoyable evening, I'm quite sure. I'm not going to mess around speaking for a long time. I'm going to ask Rabbi Shlomo Katanka, who's going to first of all speak about his grandfather, the Reverend Morris Katanka.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Shisler. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'd like to start talking about my grandfather. Later on, please God, I'll speak about my father, my late father, Chazan Morris, Chazan Moshe Katanka, Zichrono Livrocha, Hashatz Moshe ben Reb Chaim Yehoshua Halevi. My grandfather was born 27th of February 1926 at home, 35 Hungerford Street in the East End, to Harry Chaim Yehoshua and Annie Chana Katanka. His parents were married at the East London Synagogue in 1915, soon after arriving from Poland. My grandfather was the youngest of five, three elder sisters, Betty, Kitty and Linda, and an older brother, Maya. They were a musical family. The family originated a few generations back in the Polish shtetl of Kluszyn and had the original name Zalmanowicz. This was changed to Katanka in about 1820. Everyone always asks me, what does Katanka mean? So I'll add it in, which means a kaftan, a robe, or a military jacket. In Warsaw, where they moved to, the Katankas davened at the famous Great Synagogue in Klamacka Street, home to the great Chazanim, notably Chazan Gershon Sirota, and it had a choir. It was blown up under the direct orders of Himmler on the 16th of May 1943 as revenge for the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. When they came to London, they joined the Hambro Schule. Once it closed and merged with the Great Synagogue in 1936, the family transferred membership to the Landenberg District United Synagogue in Harley Grove. For 12 years, my great-grandfather filled the role of senior warden. This is where my grandfather started singing in the shul choir as a soloist following his elder brother Maya. The Chazan of the Landenberg Shul at the time was Reverend Yehuda Rosenfeld, the older brother of Chazan Avraham Rosenfeld of Finchley Shul. The choir master himself, Jack Sherman, later became a Chazan, serving at the Dalston Shul in Poets Road. The choir sang all the regular traditional Blue Book pieces and had, in addition, a wide repertoire of other shul pieces. When the shul eventually closed in 1977, my grandfather was called from Liverpool to lead the valedictory service. He had studied in Eitz Chaim Yeshiva in Thrall Street, when the Rosh Yeshiva was the renowned Gaon Rebbe Elia Lopian, grandfather of Dayan Lopian. He joined the shir of the late Rav Yaakov Elprin of Vilna in the yeshiva. Prior to this, his Cheder Rebbe was Dayan Pesach Brasina, who was a Dayan in the Federation later on, in later years. He joined the Air Training Corps at ATC, and then in April 1944 commenced services in the RAF, aged 18, as a radio operator. He served in 9 countries in both Europe and the Middle East, and was an assistant chaplain, including helping organize a large military Seder in Egypt. He even served for a time in Bletchley Park. He was later active in Ajax and was honoured as a standard bearer for the Liverpool branch of Ajax at the National Remembrance Parade at the Cenotaph. Upon demob and his return to London in 1947, he applied to join the Hebrew Teachers Course at Jews College. Once they heard his baritone voice, the college persuaded him instead to join the Chazonos course. He was first taught by the acclaimed Chazan Shlomo Pinkasovich, who made over 300 recordings, serving as Chazan in Chernowitz, the Alter Shul, and the Adas Yisrael in Berlin, until his death in 1951. Chazan Leo Brill took over at the college in 1953, and he too taught my grandfather. Students of the college were asked to fill in at various London shuls, which he did. Worthy of mention was his stint from 1947 to 1948 at the Great Synagogue Jute's Place, just 2 weeks after the great Chazan Simcha Kozovitsky left for South Africa, where he was appointed as temporary Chazan and held the position for just under a year. This was at the temporary structure erected on the site of the original shul in 1943 after it was destroyed by enemy action on the 12th of July 1941. The Rav at the time was the unmarried Rabbi Emanuel Jacobowitz. At the Great, the Chazan was not permitted to repeat words. A large white flag with a black Magen David was flown when the service was in progress, a bit like the Royal Standard at Buckingham Palace when the Queen is home. Later, in 1949, as a student, he was temporary Chazan at the Hendon Synagogue in Raleigh Close, after Chazan David Kozovitsky left for New York, and before Chazan Simon Hass took up the post. During these years, he was guest Chazan at many London shuls, including Willesden and Wembley. Upon graduating from Jews College in 1950, he took up the full-time position at Shepherd's Bush Federation Shul, Poplar Grove, being inducted on the 18th of February of that year. At the time, this was a very active shul under the leadership of Rabbi Raphael Feldman, father of the Rabbi of Monks and uncle of Dayan Geli. It was a lovely smallish shul. The members were in the main local stallholders. Out of respect for its membership, on the last day of Yontif and at Ne'ilah, the drosha was given in Yiddish. But even so, the ministers were asked to wear dog collars. Unfortunately, it eventually closed in 1989. Part of Rav Feldman's plan to keep the shul on the map was to bring my grandparents and keep up the standard of top-class chazonos. My grandfather was very friendly with the shul's rabbonim, wherever he was. The family connection to the Feldmans continued, as he was asked to sing at their children's chasanas in Gateshead, their weddings in Gateshead. Later in Liverpool, he used to go on holiday in Southport with Rabbi Wolf, the Rav in Liverpool. He was an active member of the Chazonim choir and was a soloist. The choir was made up of 35 choristers, all Chazonim, and was run by Reverend Leo Brill, who revived it in 1952 after being disbanded during the war. It was originally founded in 1935 and was led by the great composer Salman Alman. Unfortunately, it seems to have petered out in the 1960s. In the 1950s, he was asked by the great Rav Tzvi Hirsch Ferber to sing regularly at Malava Malkas at the West End Great Synagogue in Dean Street. He became quite close to Rav Ferber. When the Chazan, Reverend Alexander Amius, older brother of Reverend Saul Amius of this shul, retired in 1959, Rabbi Ferber wanted my grandfather to take up the position, but he was already in Liverpool and felt he could not leave. In 1955, he moved to the Liverpool Old Hebrew congregation in Princess Road and was inducted on the first day of Shavuos. He took over from the great Chazan, Hirsch Bornstein, who became the Chazan in Cannes. Reverend Braunstein was previously Chazan in the large Orthodox Rumbach Street Shul in Budapest. At that time, the Liverpool Jewish population was nearly 8,000, compared to about 2,500 today, with many shuls and Stiebelach. My grandfather married girlie Blanche Sweetbaum at his own shul in Shepherd's Bush on Tuesday, the 21st of March, 1950. She was the daughter of Isaac and Miriam Sweetbaum, who both came from Lutsk, now the Ukraine, and settled in Croydon. The shul in Liverpool had a strong choral tradition. The choir nearly never missed a week. The choir master from 1858 was Abraham Saki. He is well known for his Yontef Na Yigdal sung across the provinces. Quite a few of his pieces are still sung at the shul, especially when taking out and putting back the Sefer Torah. My grandfather extended the repertoire of the choir, drawing on his experience in London. He loved the dignity and the grandeur of the services at the shul. All services started and finished on time. Even though he was constrained by timings and the choir's wide repertoire, he was at his best with the choir for Melech Elyon on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, Unasana Tokef, Emes Kika Shimcha. People wept from his heartfelt rendition. He officiated at many weddings that were performed in the shul, not just the membership, but of other members of other local shuls. At the time, they used to change the paroches to white at weddings. The community had various traditions which I will share a flavor with you. During the year, they had two paroches, two covers for the ark. One was blue, for use until Pesach, and one was red, for use until Rosh Hashanah, when they used the white one. More recently, this has been reversed. Another custom they followed was that when passing in front of the bimah, one must bow towards the ark. Originally, only ministers were permitted to read Haftorahs. So my grandfather would read Haftorahs very frequently. And on Simchas Torah, the Rav was Chosan Torah and the Chazan was Chosan Breishis. In later years, this closed shop arrangement was changed, and lay people were given these honors. They also followed Chief Rabbi Nathan Marcus Adler's rule that one of the ministers must lead the mourners in Kaddish in order that it is recited in unison. And no one was called to the Torah unless he was wearing black shoes, a hat and jacket. He always combined his role as Chazan in both Shepherd's Bush and in Liverpool with Cheder teacher and Bar Mitzvah teacher. He must have taught hundreds of pupils over the years. All the pupils I ever met always mention how he was such a delightful teacher and mentor to them. He was well known for his pastoral work, and this is always mentioned whenever I meet Liverpudlians. His kind and genial manner at hospital village shivas and levai is always remembered. Once on an icy day, he drove to a shiva and managed to lose control of his car just outside the house, hitting a parked car, which hit the second, which hit the third, and so on, many suffering dents. Before starting the shiva service, he announced that his car had caused a crash into most of those people who had gathered cars. He was so well loved in the Kehillah that people did not become angry, rather they let him off. Also, he served as shul secretary. One of my earliest memories of him was sitting in his desk in the shul annex. In 1974, at the centenary of the shul building, a special service was held, and it was released for sale on a 33 record. But as is recorded from the choir loft, my grandfather was heard in the background. In Liverpool, he was often asked to lead special services in other shuls, in Wallasey, and weddings at other shuls. He was a type of Stadtchazan. On Yomim Tovim, and particularly on Yom Neroim, people from other shuls would come to Princess Road for the services, and the chazan and the choir trained to precision in the spectacular setting, something out of this world. Each week, at the end of the service, the ministers would march out the shul before anyone else was allowed to leave their seats and take off the talesim. My grandfather never had to prepare before the service by singing scales. He just walked in, and there it was. The power of his voice in such a shul with such a high ceiling was memorable. He did comment that the Kol Nidra service is rather frightening, as the shul is full when you start, unlike Shabbos, and it has to be 100% perfect. In Princess Road, there's no warden's box. They sit in designated seats in the front rows, nearest to the ark, and there are no seats for ministers in Mizrach, so they all sit in the bimah. About 20 years ago, they did install 2 chairs at the front of the shul, one on each side of the ark, especially carved by the Dorfman brothers. During the early hours of Thursday, the 31st of May 1979, the shul was broken into by thugs, and tragically, the ark and 14 Sifrei Torah were burnt. This led to major refurbishment of the shul. The shul and the replacement Sifrei Torah were reconsecrated on the last night of Hanukkah, Tuesday the 9th of December 1980. This was one of the last major services led by my grandfather. Myself and my father were present, and there's a private recording of this wonderful service. My grandfather passed away during the night on Friday night, the 24th of January 1981, Parashas Yisro, aged 54, without warning, after 27 years of service to the shul. Before burial, his coffin was brought into the shul and was placed on the bimah. Strangely, 3 of my grandfather's predecessors also served for exactly 27 years. Chazan Professor Jacob Prague, 1854 to 1881, Chazan Harris Berman, 1882 to 1909, and Chazan Abraham Coleman, 1911 to 1938. On the Shabbos morning of his death, Mr. Eddie Marks was asked to lead the service and has done so ever since, preserving the unique traditions of the shul and the nusach taught to him by my grandfather. In addition, our own David Droskin was close to my grandfather and learnt his nusach. As I was just 7 when my grandfather passed away, I've been helped immensely by various people who knew him or helped in my research for this talk. Thanks to my mother, my aunt, Mrs. Ruth Goldman, my brother's father-in-law, Rabbi Lionel Kofnas, who was Rav of Liverpool, Rabbi Philip Ginsbury, Chazan Michael Rothstein, Chazan Meir Lev of Monks, Chazan Moshe Debina, Mr. Umi Shapiro, Mr. David Roskin, Dr. Michael Jollies, who's here, Mr. David Praga, and of course, Chazan Nathan Goldman, who has come especially, my cousin from Stuttgart. Thank you very much.
Give an announcement.
Right. The recording which we have chosen is Kaylee Kaylee. It's a song which my grandfather sang in the 1950s. Somebody came to Shepherd's Bush and he heard him singing in the shul, and he was from America, and he said, "You should really have a recording." So he made a recording of Kaylee Kaylee Eli Eli. It's a song which has some Yiddish in the middle. It's remembering the times in the ghettos, and God help me. That's the theme of the song. And you can hear his voice and the feeling which he had in his tefillah.
hat uns keiner nicht gekannt, von dir, mein Gott, mit deiner heiligen Teure, dein Gebot. Shlomo Azarethoni, Eli, Shlomo Azarethoni,
I didn't have the pleasure to know Chazan Moise Katanka very well, but I'll share just one anecdote with you. I don't know if you know that the Bayswater Synagogue closed down and it was rebuilt in Maid Vale. At that time, David Katanka, Alav Shalom, was the Chazan there. And I don't know why, I never really found out, but when they consecrated that shul, Morris Katanka was actually the Chazan at the consecration ceremony. I don't know why. Does anybody know? Pardon? You know why? Well, why didn't do him? Oh, okay. Well, the one, fair enough, because I don't think he had a connection with the community, did he? Okay. Well, what I do remember very well, and that recording doesn't show it off terribly well, he actually had a huge voice, Morris Katanka. It was a very, very big voice. And I remember I was there, and I think I was sitting in the gallery even, and the doors open. When they consecrate the shul, they bring in the Sifrei Torah. And the doors open, there's Morris Katanka standing there waiting, and he belted out, Baruch haba, and chandeliers went like this. It was just astonishing, the size of his voice. Anyway, thank you very, very much indeed for that, Rabbi Shlomo. We now move on to Nathan Gluck is going to tell us about his brother Johnny Gluck, Zichrono Livracha.
The story of the life of Johnny as Chazan actually starts before he was born, in the sense that the whole genetic makeup of Johnny has cantorial DNA all over it. Our parents met after the war, having seen most of the family decimated by the horrors of the Holocaust. In 1947, our father was invited to Daven Yomim L'Roim in a small town, Kishvarda, in Hungary, where our mother's father was very involved in the shul. The shidduch suggestion for my parents was made, and by Simchas Torah, our parents were engaged. They were married on the 5th of Kislev in 1947. Jeno Gluck was born in Kishvarda, Hungary in August 1948. Johnny, as he became known later, was named Yehuda Aryeh after our mother's father. Johnny is the eldest of 4 sons. After a bit of Vayisu and Vayachanu, traveling and encamping, and more traveling and more encamping via Vienna, Germany, Paris, where our brother Harry was born, our parents with 2 children landed in London. I remember our mother saying that the papers provided for Johnny listed him as a baby girl. They were the only papers that Rabbi Schonfeld had available for him. Our father was chazan at Hendon Adas for just under 2 years. Dad was appointed as chazan at the Adelaide Road Shul in Dublin in the early 50s, and as a family, we were there for 13 years. My brother Joe and I were both born in Dublin. Our family landed in Sydney, Australia in February 1964, where our father had been appointed as chazan of the Great Synagogue in Sydney, a position he held for 25 years. The shul positions that our father held in Kishvarda, Paris, London, Dublin, and Sydney really formed the backdrop for Johnny's initial study of davening, nusach, and shul business. Our father was no doubt a great Baal Nusach and a wonderful davener to listen to week in and week out. It was really this weekly learning by osmosis that underpinned and continues to underpin the way in which all of us were taught to daven and absorbed from our father's davening. However, my parents came to the conclusion in 1966 that from a chinuch point of view, things would be better for Johnny back in London. Johnny made the return 6-week voyage on the Canberra, and one of my earliest childhood memories is going to see the ship pass on a blustery Sunday afternoon, my mother in tears as the ship went by, taking Johnny to London. In London, he studied under Reverend Brill at Jews College, and of course, there will be some of you perhaps who were classmates and or colleagues in different places during that period. Michael Binstock, who's sitting here this evening, tells me that Johnny perhaps got away with more than most under Reverend Brill, especially with strong views on chazonim and chazonas. Reverend Brill didn't like what he called American sensationalism. Johnny challenged Reverend Brill. Are you saying that Moshe Kusevitsky is a lousy chazan? Apparently, one could hear a pin drop, and the class continued. Johnny started davening Yomim Noroim in his mid-teens in Sydney. There is a wonderful slichus recording of Johnny at Western Shul, aged 18, with a choir. Beautiful Almonds Show Me Yisrael. Clearly, already a huge, huge talent. In their order, Johnny held positions of chazan at the Western, followed by Steen Court in Manchester. He then went to Marble Arch for 5 to 7 years. Whilst at my bar mitzvah in 1975, an approach was made to Johnny by Southhead Synagogue in Sydney to become chazan. The lure of being near our parents and the opportunity offered to him, Johnny and his family moved. Sadly, it was only for a couple of years. In a not unusual situation, the overall finances of the shul, which had just been rebuilt, were in tatters, and Johnny and his family decided to make aliyah. They lived in Ranana for a short period. Johnny was chazan in Ranana on a Shabbos Mavorchim basis until 1979, when the great synagogue, Walmeran Street in Johannesburg, offered him the position of chazan. I believe that South Africa provided Johnny with his greatest professional satisfaction, the professional freedom and deep appreciation for his cantorial ability, together with the association with terrific choirs and great musicians, the rich cantorial love of chazonas that South Africa was always known for. His contribution to the forming of the Johannesburg Jewish Male Choir, his recording for the SABC of Art of the Cantor and of a Yiddish program, and most importantly, his beautiful davening with a choir in a setting of a grand, magnificent edifice, all contributed to his richest contribution to cantorial music. I feel that there are some pieces which are Johnny Gluck signature pieces, whether cantorial, Hebrew, or Yiddish, arguably sung better than the originals. Pinchik's Ribono Shel Olam, Almonds Show Me Yisrael, Lewandowski's Zachartiloch, Machtenberg's Ritzei, Rosenblatt's Uvnucha Yomar, the Hebrew song Lo Teda, and the Yiddish song Mamala. YouTube's clips are available if you look under the name Johnny Gluck. I remember well the sound of Lechuna Ranana on a Friday evening, the grandeur of the davening, hearing the reverberation of the sound from the large dome in the shul, carrying this glorious voice to usher in Shabbos. Johnny was an artist and an artisan whose working knowledge of music, opera, chazonos, nusach, Yiddish songs, Hebrew songs, encapsulated and influenced musically everything he did. He worked very hard and took very seriously the importance of continuing professional development. I still visualize him sitting on the floor by his hi-fi set with the headphones plugged in, listening to great operatic performances. There were no wireless headphones in those days. He was always happy to help other chazonim or bali tefillah to learn nusach from him. I think the lack of professional approach to nusach by some who should have known better was a source of disappointment to him. Unusually for a chazan, he had, shall we say, some interesting interactions with some of the rabbonim with whom he worked. For example, he came to do a chuppah, and the officiating rabbi decided that Johnny's maroon shoes were not appropriate and made him go and change. In those days, that was how things worked in some places. In Sydney, with Rabbi Silberman, he enjoyed a wonderful relationship where there was a great mutual respect and understanding. Johnny was married to Judy Forscher, the daughter of Chazan Shlomo Forscher, and they have 4 children, 3 daughters and a son. Baruch Hashem, that family has grown, and there are now grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Judy was very much behind the success of Johnny, and having come from a family in the business, she knew the business. Johnny had a wicked sense of humor. He loved a joke. He loved football. He was loved by congregants for whom he always had a smile. He was a real people's person. The greatest testimony to this is that I still have people coming up to me saying that they remember Johnny virtually every week, even now. At our wedding, less than a year before he passed away, he did a beautiful chuppah, which is also on YouTube, and looks the picture of perfect health. Little did we know what was about to happen. Sadly, it all came to quite an abrupt end with his illness, which really started during Aseret Yemei Tshuva in 1984, ultimately leading to his passing in June 1985. When I reflect on the fact that he passed away so young, aged only 36, and to have already had such a deep understanding of music and cantorial knowledge that he had for someone so chronologically young, I marvel. Here is a clip of Zacharti Loch, which was recorded as the final piece on the SABC Art of the Cantor program, which I feel captures the musical, vocal, and cantorial artistry of Johnny most. Thank you.
I was at Jews College from 1963. Were you? And I remember when Johnny Oliver Shalom came over to visit before he actually started studying there. I'm looking at Chazan Binstock here because he was in his class with me, although he's much older than me, but sorry about that. But we were in college together, and I remember when Johnny came over, and any Chazan who came into the class, Reverend Brill would say, "You must sing something." Now, Johnny actually came, he was going to join the class, and Reverend Brill got him to sing. And he sang, I think he may have sung Shebona Beit HaMikdash, Oru Mipnei Chatzaenu. But what I remember, we sat there and we looked at one another. We couldn't believe what we were hearing. There was this 16-year-old boy who had a voice of a man in his 20s. It was mature. The Chazonos was staggeringly beautiful. the voice had to get better, which it did, as you heard there. And I remember it was just, you remember well, I'm sure, it was amazing to hear him at that stage. I always had the feeling with Johnny that B'nai Shalom gave him an enormous amount very, very early. You know, a lot of people, for most of us, we get a bit at a time as we're going along. B'nai Shalom perhaps he needed somebody up there to sing more. So he gave Johnny an awful lot when he was very, very young. And he was a lot of fun in college, a lot of fun. But boy, he would, had he been spared, he would have been an absolute superstar. No question about it. He was very well known already, and he was doing very well. Had the B'nai Shalom spared him, he would have been one of the tops. You can hear how he was really, really, really very good. Very, very tragic. We now move on to Chazan Yehuda Landenberg, and I'm going to ask his son Avi going to tell us about him.
My father was born in Lodz, pronounced Łódź, on the 15th of September 1925. He was the youngest of 7 children. In 1932, his parents obtained papers to leave Poland and travel to Palestine. Dad was just 7 years old. Sadly, his 3 older brothers couldn't leave Poland as they were of conscription age and had to serve in the Polish army. The middle of the 3 boys, Nachman, was a child prodigy. He studied in the Mir Yeshiva for 10 years, and he showed great promise. He had an agile mind, a quick grasp. Nachman and his 2 siblings, Falk and Shlomo, perished early in the war. My grandparents, who I was never fortunate enough to know, received a postcard from them postmarked in Katowice, pleading for food and warm clothes. Tragically, they were never heard from again, and we don't know where they lay. Dad, who like many had the muzzle to be spared, bore a deep sense of guilt throughout his life. Why was I preserved, but my brothers perished? But he would beam with pride when he spoke of his brother who had been in the Mir. The Mir, along with Ponevezh and Slobodka, were the great centers of Jewish learning in Eastern Europe. My father was the son of a Rav, Reb Moshe Landenberg, a rabbi with a task which he regarded as the most precious of all. He taught children, first in Poland and then in Eretz Israel. Perhaps it was this difficult story that formed the interpretation of his prayers. He was a Baal Tefillah in the truest sense, a master of prayer. Simon Schama, in his History of the Jews, says, "We are a people of songs." My father was a teacher like his father, but through music, sacred music, music informed by a past from which perhaps most of us have become too disconnected or know too little. He had an extraordinary ability to lead us in prayer. He was our shaliach, our messenger. He had a close dialogue with the Almighty, and through the incredible reach of his voice and his heartfelt song, he brought us closer to Hashem. Those of us who are fortunate enough to experience his tefillah, particularly on the Yamim Noraim, will know what I mean. It's impossible to convey in words how his artistry, craftsmanship, and energy, his deep understanding of tefillah, combined with a powerful and yet subtly nuanced delivery, would lift us al kanfei nesharim, on eagle's wings. We could each soar when we entered the world of his prayer space. I can't imagine what growing up in Tel Aviv in the 1940s and 1950s must have been like. And I remember naively asking him why he and his family didn't live in Jerusalem, thinking it was a holier place to be. And he answered, "Why would anyone want to live in Jerusalem? There's no beach." He served in the Haganah, the pre-state army of the Yishuv, and fought for independence in 1948, and I believe he also returned briefly in 1956 for the Suez Crisis. He was a sergeant major in a unit that was stationed in the area of Maccabim, tasked with protecting the farms and moshavim, who were constantly coming under attack. The unit was made up of Dati soldiers, and it was in this unit that Moshe Korn and Aaron Siegel were under his command. They were lifelong friends and all studied together in Israel. They were the original 3 tenors who eventually came to London. Dad to Willesden, Moshe Korn to Raleigh Close, and Aaron Siegel to Southgate and Cockfosters. They studied under Ravitz and were required to go through the complete liturgy twice a week for 2 years, hence their artistry and deep knowledge of Nusach. With commitment and zeal, and as a result of what had been destroyed in Europe, they lobbied Lieb Glantz to come from the USA. A dear friend of mine, Robert Lippmann, the curator of all things Willesden, who now lives in Ashkelon, told me that Dad had told him of his time when he was young, when he was standing in a street in Tel Aviv and became transfixed on hearing the sound emanating from somebody's apartment. It was a recording of Lieb Glantz singing Av HaRachamim. And that's what clinched his decision to become a chazan. Dad was also passionate about opera and sang in the Tel Aviv Opera. He was a lyric tenor with great dynamic range. Times were hard in Israel in the 1950s, and it was tough to earn a living either as an opera singer or as a chazan. And so, with a heavy heart, he knew he would have to travel further afield to earn a living. He accepted his first position as a chazan to the Yekesha Shul in Rue de Montevideo off Avenue de Foch, close to the Arc de Triomphe, the equivalent of Paris's Fifth Avenue. It wasn't a bad first position. My mother, who was orphaned in Hungary and was miraculously taken under Swedish protection, we don't know for sure, but probably by Wallenberg, and subsequently after the war was taken to Israel with her sister by the youth Aliyah, the Aliyat HaNoah. She met my father on the Mashav where they both lived. Mum often told me that her time in Paris were the best years of her life. And they both used their time well in Paris, studying French and soaking up the culture. Dad continued to progress his vocal studies at the Conservatoire de Paris under Maestro Valdanini. I don't know who Valdanini is, but it sounds good. It took Mum several months before she could get her papers to travel from Israel and join him in Paris. Dad also had to wait en route in Milan for some weeks whilst waiting for his visa to be issued. And I recall a wonderful photograph of him standing outside the Duomo di Milano with so many pigeons perched on his arms and one on his head. He was smiling with such joy. He loved to travel and as well to read. He was a Renaissance man, cultured, refined, and surprisingly liberal. He loved his religion, was true and faithful to his tribe, and passionate about many causes. After 2 years in Paris, he received a call to be the chazan at the Central Synagogue in Manchester and moved there in May 1956, where they enjoyed another couple of very happy and successful years. And this is where Ronit, my sister, was born. Then came the call from Willesden, Heathfield Park, which at the time was a centre of Anglo-Jewish universe. There were 7 shuls within a 2 miles radius back in the 1960s. Heathfield Park, Willesden, Warm Lane, Cricklewood, Bronsbury Shul, Dollis Hill, Old Shem, Neasden, and of course the Stiebel. The Bnei Akiva Bayit was located in Willesden Lane, and there were 4 Jewish schools. His induction took place on Hanukkah 5720, 1959. I'm told the shul was packed for the event, and he went on to serve the community for over 30 years. Ministers in the 1960s and 70s weren't looked after very well. It wasn't an era as it is now of rock star chazanim performing weddings around the world. Times were tough. We grew up frugally and modestly, but we never wanted for anything. Dad devoted himself to causes outside of the community as well. Every Thursday, without fail, he would visit 2 hospitals in the centre of London, attending to the needs of Jewish patients. A staunch Zionist, he was active in the Mizrahi movement, for years raised funds for the General Israel Orphans Home for Girls in Jerusalem, something that was close to my parents' heart after my mother's own experiences. In the latter years at Willesden, he took it upon himself to support the community of Kibbutz Atzmona and the Gush Katif, now part of Gaza. He raised funds to restore several Sifrei Torah and distributed them to needy communities in Israel. And I know that he personally took 2 of them to the Gush and dedicated each of them to the memories of his lifelong friends, Moshe Korn and Aaron Siegel. He was also the editor of the much sought-after best-selling magazine, the Cantors Review. and would organize an annual event where all the Chazanim in the UK would get together. They would leave their canonicals at home, let their hair down, wash down vast quantities of schmaltz herring with frozen schnapps, drink a few beers, sing some Yiddish songs, and have a good collective known about their gabayim. A man of such love and passion of Yiddishkeit, someone to whom knowledge, Ahavat Torah, Kiddush Hashem was the core and foundation of his life, he is the greatest role model and teacher any child can dream of. These are not my words, but the words of Rabbi Harry Rabinowitz, Zichrono Livracha. They were said under the chuppah at my sister's wedding in 1982. Reb Harry was a true tzaddik and Dad's best friend, and they lie side by side in Willesden Cemetery now. Whew, I didn't think this was going to be that difficult. He was a very learned man. His shas, his chumashim, his mishnayos were all well used, and in the latter years of the shul, when there was no rav, and even long after he retired, he diligently prepared and gave shiurim every Shabbat. As well as his large collection of sefarim, he also had an extensive collection of liturgical music books and manuscripts. I fondly remember him asking me to track down a certain book by Kvartin, which I found for him in New York. Willesden Shul has now undergone a phenomenal revival, and it goes from strength to strength thanks to the wonderful leadership of Baruch Levine. But it reached a low point back in the 90s with a dwindling congregation. Reb Harry used to say he would daven for a dozen in the same inimitable style that he would for a congregation of 1,000. And there were many times in the last years of his tenure when there really were only a few, but he always gave it his all. As a child growing up in Willesden, my most memorable moments were meeting him in the tiny robing room after services, particularly after Musaf on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. He was exhausted, soaked in sweat like an athlete who had just run a marathon. He was my hero. The best, though, was after Nila, when after he had had a few minutes to catch his breath, we would sneak off to the kitchen and break the fast on a chilled glass of Palwin and some biscuits. Nothing ever tasted so good. And we did that every year. On reaching retirement age, the United Synagogue kindly offered him a plot in Willesden Cemetery. A great and appropriate honor, I'm told. But Dad actually turned it down, saying that he'd spent over 30 years in Willesden and he thought it was time for a change of scenery. His real wish was to return to Israel. And about 4 years before he died, he asked me to travel with him to Israel, which I did. The main purpose of the trip was to visit his parents' graves in Tel Aviv. It was an immensely emotional experience as he collapsed in tears by his mother's graveside. I'd never seen my father cry or even shed a tear in my whole life. He was a man who carried his congregation through the cycles of life, sharing the happy occasions and also the sad, always conducting himself with gravitas and solemnity and providing strength for others. Finally, he was able to open his heart and reveal his own inner pain. Perhaps he knew what was coming, because only a few months later, he suffered a severe stroke, and as a result, he was unable to speak, let alone sing, ever again. I've often heard people say that they don't like Chazanut. And how many times have I heard orders passed down from shul boards of management that the service must end no later than noon? How did we become so complacent? I feel deeply honored to have been asked to share this platform and hear the stories about so many wonderful Chazanim. But I wonder how many people here, actually I don't wonder how many people here because I think I know the answer. How many people have actually had the opportunity to hear real Chazanut? Will our children ever experience real Chazanut? You have to be a mamin, a believer. That belief fiercely in his God and in the immutability of his Torah. And growing up under the shadow of pre-war continental Europe, to have suffered, to have fought for Jewish survival, to carry the pain and the hurt of your siblings who were reduced to ashes. As a kid, I sang in the original Pirchei London under Yigal Tzalik. But I feel great sadness when I hear those songs in our services and synagogues today. It doesn't do justice to our tefillah. They were just pop songs. We need to protect our heritage, and I feel very strongly about this. And I'm particularly concerned for the survival of Nusach Anglia. Who here, I'm sure all of you probably remember the Blue Book, but you don't see it in synagogues anymore, and I think we need to dust it off and circulate it a lot more. We must remember how to cry again on Yom Kippur, to believe that there may be a din v'cheshbon, an account and reckoning. If you heard my father, you could experience yirat shamayim, a fear of heaven. I hope that the stories we hear of all the great chazanim tonight continue to influence our lives. There's a recording of Dad singing in Yiddish. Zol shoin kumen de Geula. It tells of our yearning for the Mashiach, and the audience sing along joyously with him. If Yehuda Landenberg could sing with such hope and confidence in the future, we should all learn to sing that song as well. Thank you.
It's of great sadness that Chazan Landenberg didn't record more. He didn't do many concerts. I don't know why. I always thought of him as one of the hidden Chazonim of London. He certainly was one of the finest Chazonim of his time. In a sense, did he follow Feigenblum? Do you remember?
Yes.
He followed Chazan Feigenblum, and that probably didn't help him, because Feigenblum, many of you will know, was a star Chazan in his own right before Chazan Landenberg came to Willesden. But Landenberg really was an absolutely amazing Chazan. We now move on to, going to come back to Rabbi Katanka, who's going to talk about his late father, our very dear friend, David Katanka, Zichrono Livracha.
Now I'd like to talk about my late father, Rabbi David Katanka, Zichrono Livracha, Harav David ben Hashatz Moshe Halevi. My late father was born in Hammersmith Hospital on Wednesday, the 27th of December 1950. In 1955, he moved to Liverpool. He attended Liverpool Hebrew School and the famous Liverpool Institute Grammar School, together with the Liverpool Yeshiva. He seemed to win the prizes every year at the Yeshiva, and I now hold part of his large collection of book prizes from the Yeshiva. After his bar mitzvah in Princess Road Shul in January 1964, he started laning every few weeks at Greenbank Drive Shul in Liverpool. And by the age of 14, he was the Chazan Sheni, serving under the late Rabbi Morris Nemeth, later of the New West End Shul, and the Reverend Samuel Wolfson, not to be confused with Reverend Meyer Wolfson of Childwall Shul of Liverpool. Reverend Samuel Wolfson, on the occasion of the marriage of his daughter, accompanied his daughter, the bride, down the aisle in his top hat, and then quickly went into the robing room and changed into canonicals to officiate as Chazan. My father wanted to do that with my sisters, but for some reason they didn't want it. At Greenbank Drive, all ex officio wardens would continue wearing top hats, and there were tens of top-hatted people in the congregation. My father always enjoyed singing and decided that he wanted to follow in his father's path as a Chazan very early on, learning how to sing complicated Dreidelach at a very early age. When he was 14 and 15, he led Shachris on Yonu Neroim at the beautiful small shul in the old age homes in Stapley, Liverpool. In 1967, age 16, he followed in his father's footsteps and commenced learning Chazonos with Reverend Leo Brill at Jews College. To the best of my knowledge, the only father and son who ever studied under him. Reverend Brill's brilliance as a composer was that his pieces could be embellished or left as they were, a wonderful bass nusach. In 1973, after 5 years of study, he achieved the Chazonos diploma with distinction from Jews College. At that time, Jews College was at Montague Place, near Marble Arch, and he was able to hear the great Chazonim of the West End, particularly Chazan Shimon Hass of the Central Shul, Great Portland Street, who will be discussed later on. Chazan Hass had studied in Jews College with my grandfather and took an interest in my father and his advancement as a Chazan. By 1970, he was appointed as minister and reader at Chiswick and district-affiliated United Synagogue, which had about 50 members at the time. It was a very small shul and actually closed down for about 6 weeks every year during the summer. In 1972, he was appointed as part-time Chazan at the newly built Bayswater and Maid of Ale Shul in Andover Place. As Rabbi Shisler mentioned, a particularly special occasion was the opening service of the shul, which was led by the then Chief Rabbi Emanuel Jacobowitz, together with both my late father and grandfather. Bayswater had the tradition of saying Piyutim on Yom Tov mornings and also the 4 parashas. So his training for that at Jews College was put to good use. Later, when my father's first cousin, the late Michael Weitzman, was minister at the shul, I got to visit it, so I did not remember my first home, as I was only aged 1.5 when we left. In 1973, he married my mother, who's here, Miss Marilyn Liebman of Southend and Westcliff. At the Maid of Ale Shul, it was attended by many Chazonim and Rabbonim and is officiated by Rabbi Harry Rabinovitz, who we just spoke about before. And at that time, my father was then appointed as full-time Chazan at Bayswater Maid of Ale. My maternal grandfather, Rabbi Menashe Liebman, had served as chazan at the Kahal Hasidim Shul in Waterloo Road in Manchester, so I have chazanus on both sides. On a personal note, my bris milah was held at the Maida Vale Shul. Rabbi Ephraim Gasworth, the Rav at the time, was my sandik, and Chazan Michael Plaskow was my moil. From 1975 until 1978, we lived in Streatham. My father served as chazan of the Brixton Shul in Effra Road. The Rav was Rabbi Philip Ginsbury, who was my brother Gideon's sandik, who was here too. The shul was influenced by the famous Borough Shul, the first congregation established south of the River Thames. So on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the members followed the service in silence. But surprisingly, on Simchas Torah, incessant sweet throwing and merrymaking was the norm. I remember the evening of Tisha B'Av, where the whole shul was only illuminated by 2 candles as prescribed in the Shulchan Aruch. Due to the danger of walking in Brixton near the shul on Friday night to Motzi Shabbos, services were held in our home in Streatham. At this time, my father learned how to drive, practicing with the Rav and the Minyan men. And he mastered the skill of bris milah. While still in London, he used to train with Mr. John Hargreaves, who was a vocal consultant with the English National Opera. I remember going with him on occasion to these lessons at the Old Sadler's Wells. In Leeds, he attended the Leeds College of Music, and later when he returned to London, he was trained by Mr. Leslie Seymour of Old Welwyn. Chief Rabbi Jacobowitz was very keen that clergy move around from place to place. Every 5 or 10 years, my father followed this practice. In 1978, we moved northward to the end of the M1 to Leeds, home to approximately 16,000 Jews. My father was appointed Chazan Rishon at the United Hebrew Congregation's Moortown Shul in Shadwell Lane. He succeeded the great Dayan Yosef Apfel, who retired from the shul but carried on as Av Beis Din of Leeds. They became very close, and they used to sit next to each other during the year, every day of the week at shul next to the Aron Kodesh. The Rav was Rabbi Dr. Solomon Brown, who also had a close relationship with my father. And the Chazan Sheni was Reverend Wolf Sikowski, who we used to walk to and from shul with over Shabbos, because he lived near. The shul was connected with 2 other shuls, all in the United Hebrew Congregation group. The first built shul in Leeds, the great Belgrave Street, was built in 1877. The famous Dome New Synagogue in Chapeltown Road opened in 1932. Every 6 months or so, we would walk with my father to one of these 2 shuls, and he would daven, swapping with Chazan Bromberg of the New and the Chazan of the Great. In freezing February 1980, my father and Rabbi Brown visited communist Moscow, and they performed a clandestine chuppah of 2 refuseniks in a flat. My father recorded the Megillah and distributed a pair of tefillin and other religious items. In 1981, Yorkshire Television filmed a mock service with Rabbi Dr. Solomon Brown and my father and the shul choir. Actually, they all were borrowed from the Moortown Shul, and it was shown as part of ITV's morning worship. I was the youngest congregant, aged 6. Recently, I managed to find a copy of this broadcast, and it was posted on YouTube under Mock Shabbos Service, Great Synagogue, Belgrave Street, Leeds, 1981. Our shul was very busy with about 1,500 members, with a simcha nearly every other week. There were often weddings on Sundays, and I remember going along to many chuppahs on a Sunday afternoon. So I can sing the standard fare of the time, Mombach Sporach Haba, Zultzes Miadir, Salomon's Horiu, Mombach's Haluko, in my sleep. The shul was oddly extended in a sort of T-shape, and the organ was in the far corner at the bottom of the T, so the organist was as far away as possible from the chuppah. And she could not hear much, and the timings were always a bit off. The choir, led expertly by the choir master, Mr. Jack Fixman, chiefly over Yom Neroim, was up to a standard and repertoire that could be any large London shul choir, made up of senior balabatim of the shul. My father was passionate about following the correct nusach. When we moved back to London, to Dunstan Road, he was extremely pleased that on Yom Tov, all melodies used were different to those used in a regular Shabbos, apart from 2 lines, V'zos HaTorah and Bayom HaHu at the end of Oleinu. He was very careful about diction, the correct pronunciation of Hebrew, and never jumbling his words, always loud and clear. He was also careful to use the correct nusach on all occasions. He was particularly upset that on Shabbos and Yom Tov, very few people used the nusach for brachos and pesukei zimra different from a weekday on a Shabbos. He was an expert on Minhag Anglia and the cherished Blue Book. For example, he always employed the Lechal Dodi for the Sefira and the 3 weeks. Even when we lived in the north, when the Kehillas were not well versed in the theme tunes of the Yom Tovim, he always used the appropriate tune for the nights of Yom Tov, Yehalalu, Hodu, Ono in Hallel, and also benching Rosh Chodesh, and of course Shir Malas at home. He was very fast at catching tunes and new melodies, and had an amazing repertoire of different tunes, about 20 for Vishomru, for example. Rarely did he use the same tune one week to the next. Listening to him week in and week out was a very varied and interesting experience. I recall that he once he learned from music and sang all over 7 weeks of Chazan Yossele Rosenblatt's Shiva Ponim Shel Kiddush for Friday night. He was a genius at the art of improvisation and would sing different dreidlich and motifs, enhancing the basic nusach. It amazed me how he never seemed to confuse tunes. For example, every shul and choir have a different version of Oleinu in the Musaf of Yom Noraim, but they're all very similar. And he was always never confused the slight differences. And he can actually tell you which shul sang it how, exactly how they sang it. In Dunstan Road, Oleinu was particularly memorable, as they have the custom that the Rav recites Oleinu first, the whole congregation, hundreds of men and women, bowing and kneeling on the floor. And then it was my father's turn, and he sang it with a choir so memorably. The choir led by Mr. Alan Mays had an interesting custom of repeating V'ne'emar every time the Chazan said it in the verses on Rosh Hashanah. Also the Yars Kaddish on Simchas Torah, woven together from all the shul tunes of the year, were a feat, sung without any music nor any written reminders. In addition to learning Nusach from my father, he learned from various UK Chazanim, in particular the celebrated Chazan Pinchas Feigenblum of Willesden and later Cricklewood Shul, who was featured here last year, who we just mentioned, who recorded for my father about 20 cassettes with the Nusach of the entire year, and Chazan Baruch Smus of Fieldgate Street Shul in the East End. Often during the summer holidays, he learned from local Chazanim. Much is saved on cassette, including Chazan Kalman Fausner of Holland Park Road in Hove, Chazan Israel Cohen of Bournemouth, and Chazan Ari Garbutt of South End Westcliff Shul. It's all holiday places. He also learned from his predecessor in Leeds, Dain Yosef Apfel, and Lahavdil Chazan Pesach Siegel of Hendon Adas. Recently, Mr. Baruch Rappaport has digitalized some of these recordings. He was a master of interpreting the words, and this helped inspire the Kehillas he served. This is Reis and Etra, drawing the people into the tefillas. His chazanos was never about self-aggrandizement. In 1985, we moved to Sheffield, and my father was not only the chazan, but also the minister. During those 5 years, he learned for smicha, traveling to Manchester Kollel twice a week, and he was tested for smicha by the London-based Diner and Troy, Lahavdil, Diane Kaplan, and Diane Lerner gave him the smicha. In Sheffield, on the Yom Noraim, in addition to the shul's Kolrina choir, in the choir loft, under the direction of Dr. Emmanuel Bergman, and later his son Mark Bergman, which I participated, my brothers and I sang lovely pieces with my father on the bimah. Rosenblatt's Ya'aleh, Zacharti Loch of Lewandowski, V'yesoyu, Areshes, Mochel Avonos. It was a real shame we never recorded them. In 1990, we moved back to London, and my father became full-time Rav and Chazan in Dunstan Road, and Diane Binstock was the part-time Rav and part-time Diane. Before that, his cousin, who's here, Chazan Michael Binstock, was Chazan, and interestingly, he'd previously served as Chazan in Brixton, as had my father. For me, his really special moment was when, upon the opening of the Ark on Yom Tov, he would recite the closing lines of Ribono Shel Olam, full of meaning. Also, the Hineni before Musaf, composed by the late Leeds Belgrave Street Chazan Solomon Diamond on Yonim Noroim. And also a special recitation of Ne'ilah and the haunting mystical melody for the sevenfold Hashem Hu Elokim, which he sang, going higher and higher, symbolizing the Shekhinah rising back up. For the last 14 years of his life, from 2000, when he left Dunstan Road, he served 3 congregations as both Rav and Chazan while commuting from London. The Scottish capital, Edinburgh, 2002-2003, the great naval base, Portsmouth and South Sea, 2004-2011, and the pretty seaside town of St. Anne's, where he served from Hoshana Rabbah of 2013 till his final service, Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar, 2014. During these years, he accomplished much, As well as serving as Rav of Nightingale Home, he researched and wrote many articles on Anglo-Jewish history, which have been posthumously published by my brother, Rav Moshe Baruch Katanka of Gateshead. Together with his authoritative thesis for his MA on Jewish superstitions, all in the book under the name of Kol Dodi. He sang and preached Shabbos and Yom Tovim in literally 90% of all Anglo-Jewish communities, from Cardiff to Glasgow, Birmingham to Brighton, Harrogate, Woodside Park, Ruislip, Belfast, just to name a few. Even the Caulfield Shul in Melbourne and Malmo in Sweden. He literally affected thousands of people's spiritual lives. The last Yom Noraim of his life in 2014, I was zocher to share the davening with my father in Southport, the only time we ever did it together. It was really a great experience. The piece chosen is from Ne'ilah, which I already mentioned was one of his best moments. As he put it, this expressive piece so beautifully captures the emotions of Ne'ilah. It was composed by his teacher, Chazan Leo Brill, and he recorded it for his cassette Shirei David, the Songs of David, which has 13 pieces, and was released in around 2000. He is accompanied by Mr. Alexander Knapp. I must thank Tony for his expert, for putting the music together for us and organising everything tonight, and also to thank Mr. Spencer Nathan, and also to thank Rabbi Shisler.
Atan Señor la poshir Vimin chavshuta Mikabel shavim Vatel aleinu Hashem Elokeinu Yisrados lefanecho Al kol avodoseinu נכתב מיושק ידינו וסיקב אלינו בשובו של אמו לפניך כי שימוך ניחכים למען יברך Hashem amarto en keis ishef avosenu yenisbar nichache Hashem oseinu yata yadeh Acharisenu Vimo Besoleo Levichach Yebeso Slichosenu Ma'anu Mechayenu Mechazenu Ma'an Tzilkeinu Ma'an Yishenu Hashem Elokeinu, Elokei Avuseinu, Halo Kol HaGiborim, יאי לפניך לאנשי השם כלא היו וחכמים כבלימדו ולבנים כבלי הסתר לא מעשיהם טוב בימי חייהם הבל לפניך וסל אדם מן הבהמות כי הכל הבל
David Katanka didn't have a spectacular voice, but he was probably the most wonderful Baal Tefillah I ever heard. I still can remember just a mincha. We had a Chazonim convention, and just before we start the afternoon again, we'll daven mincha. Who's going to daven mincha? Come on, David, you daven. And he didn't put on any, it was no performance, he was just davening, presumably like the way you always davened. It was just glorious. You remember this? You can almost imagine him just standing there talking to God. It was just fantastic. And I've said before, I've said it to Marilyn, I wish I could have heard him on Yom Noam. If it was a toss-up between listening to him or one of the spectacular Chazonim, I probably would have gone to hear him, because I bet he's davening. And he really could daven. He really, really could daven. Anyway, we've had some wonderful experiences tonight. We're going to move Baruch Hashem. The next chazan we're going to hear about is still with us, Madmer Vesim Shana. We're going to hear from his son, from Stuart Hass, who's going to talk about his father, Simon.
My father, Chazan Simon Hass, or sein Gesund, who was born in Yaroslav, Galicia, Poland on the 30th of July, 1925, even though records show his official birthday was the 2nd of May, 1927. My grandparents, Olema Shalom, did this to avoid forced conscription into the Russian army as a teenager in Siberia. My holy Zayda, Moshe Hass, Olema Shalom, was the president of Agudas Yisrael in Yaroslav, and was descended from generation after generation of Hasidic Balei Tefillah of Mozich. People who know Mozich know it's the richest nusach in Poland, Hasidic nusach in Poland. The result was a very musical family comparable to the 4 Kozovitsky brothers, in that there were 4 Hass brothers who all became chazonim in wonderful shuls. The oldest was Yankel, Oliver Shalom, who was chazan in New York. Then came my father, bless him, in London, Benjamin in Har Nof Yerushalayim, and finally David Hass in Bat Yam. After 2 years in Belz Yeshiva Katana until May 1939, my father had a very, very happy life with his 9 siblings and parents. However, when the Germans Yamach Shemam invaded Poland in September 1939, they fled into neighboring Ukraine and realized it was probably as bad, if not worse, than being in Poland. They certainly couldn't stay and could only move eastwards into Russia, resulting in landing in Novosibirsk, Krasnoyarsk, and then far into the wilderness of Irkutsk. They had endured a horrific train journey that lasted several weeks in total in the most appalling conditions. Baruch Hashem Chabad were caring for thousands upon thousands of Yidden, keeping Yiddishkeit alive in Russia, where practicing Judaism in public was punishable by serving many years in terrible gulag prisons. Rabbonim and important Jewish leaders were executed outright by state prosecutors through quasi-courts of remorseless anti-Semitic hatred under megalomaniac and mass butcher Joseph Stalin in Yamach Shemam. As history has now proven, Stalin murdered even more people than Adolf Hitler, Yamach Shemo. During the war, and then up to his death in 1956, millions were wiped out. Anyway, to move on to happier situation, the four Hass brothers would sing as a quartet to soften up the Russian authorities very often, and so give Jewish families more favorable conditions, such as obtaining visas to move around the Siberian wilderness. Quite a large area, 1.5 times the size of Europe. My Zayda Olosham used to say the severe winter cold, minus 40 degrees, was a benign bracha. Straight from Hashem. Why? Because not even cholera, typhoid, diphtheria or smallpox could exist in such extreme cold. After the Second World War was over in 1945, Stalin Yamach Shemo opened a very small window for Yidden to return to Poland and Eastern Europe for a few months of the summer. The whole Hass family returned to Yaroslav to see if any of the family survived, but tragically they were all murdered in Auschwitz, Belsen and Treblinka during that horrific Holocaust we must never ever forget throughout our lives. The Hass brothers' talent was greatly acknowledged, and they all studied classical music and singing after obtaining scholarships by moving briefly to the Lodz Conservatoire. By 1947, the Iron Curtain imposed by Stalin was getting tighter over Eastern Europe, so many of these Yidden realized they had to emigrate, if possible, to the USA. However, many people lacked the capital required and had to settle for London or Paris. My Zayda had several distant cousins who lived in Paris, so the Hass family settled there, where these cousins greatly assisted in obtaining entry for my father to study classical singing at the world-famous Paris Conservatoire for 2 years. In 1949, French politics became ugly and very anti-immigrant and naturally anti-Semitic, so my Zayda decided to go to England, the home of Europe's saviour, Sir Winston Churchill, and as a well-known leader of Polish Agudas Yisrael, he took all the Hass family to Linthorpe Road, Stamford Hill, where they davened in Bell's Stiebel. Somehow or other, a Gabba of Raleigh Close United heard my father sing and insisted he become chazan of that shul after David Kovitsky and Chazan Katanka left, which my father accepted after marrying my dear late mother, Elaine Oleh Shalom, in 1950. Sir Isaac Wilson heard of my father singing at Raleigh Close and said he wanted somebody who survived the Holocaust to daven with great energy and great sincerity for his kahila at Great Portland Street, the Central Synagogue. My father flatly refused because the choir, like so many unfortunately United, was mixed with male and female choristers. Incidentally, there were very few shuls that had male-only choirs in 1950, probably Dunstan Road, Egerton Road and Raleigh Close. Isaac Wolfson soon agreed a male-only choir, and in 1950 my father became chazan with that prominent shul, remaining there till 1992. From 1950 to 1992, the longest-serving chazan ever in London, probably in Britain, at one kehillah, according to the Jewish Yearbook. In 1954, my father obtained his LLCM at the London College of Music and made various records raising money for Chabad, collecting vast donations from the likes of Sir Isaac Wolfson, Sir Charles Claw, Viscount Beerstead, Professor Isaiah Berlin, and many others to help build in 1964 the wonderful Beis Chabad in Stamford Hill. The sufferings he endured during the war years in Siberia with his family and countless Yidden was greatly alleviated by Lubavitch, who he always calls the Sukkos Yisrael. Retiring in 1992, my father, bless him, still lives in Allendale Avenue, Finchley N3, listening to classical music and most chazonim of all types and styles. Reb Chuna Halpern Zatzal called Diane Fisher Zatzal the London Aruv, and this Edrei Rov wrote several pieces for my father, another reminder of the polymath genius of this wonderful Dayan who was in Edgware for so long, who my father said was a great mumcha of nusach and music in general. The chazonos of Laman Yibu, which you're going to hear tonight, from the second paragraph of the Shema, communicates and demonstrates my father's mysticism and a deep lyrical dignity, which my father claims is due to his association with the great Rebbes of Galicia and Poland. They really appreciated and clung to magnificent and awe-inspiring nusach. The Holy Baal Shem Tov said, the tongue is the pen of the mind, but melody, probably referring to nusach, is the pen of the soul. As it so happens, it's his birthday tonight, 1698, as it is the birthday of the Alter Rebbe of Chabad and the Yortzeit 310 years ago of the Maharal of Prague, who died in 1610. So, if you don't want to say Tachlum Tomo, you don't have to. Lastly, the Vilna Gaon was believed to have stated he was jealous of a great chazan because through the beauty and wonder of Nusach, the tefillah of the chazan reached closer to Hashem than that of anybody else in the tzibur. I wish you all a kasiva chasima toiva and the git gebenst shur. Thank you for listening so patiently and making this such a lovely evening.
Man yirboy mechem imeivenechem al vadom asher nishibadu shem lavu esechem lo seis lohem ime ashumah Prissimo so וזכרתם את כל מצוות השם ועשיתם ולא סוסו אחרי לבבכם ואחרי עיניכם אשר אתם זוינים, אשר אתם זוינים אחריהם. אוי למול תסגרו עשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני השם אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים אני אדוני שם אלוהיכם
Did you remember Midnight Hass? How many of you went to Midnight Hass? We used to go. You know, I don't know if you feel the same, but some of the memories, the greatest memories, impressions of my life are musical ones. I was about, I suspect, 17, which is more than 50 years ago. I'm not saying that to tell you how old I am. It's that long ago that I can remember this so well. This incident. There used to be the Warsaw Ghetto Memorial meeting every year, and it was held. Particularly, I was there in the theatre in one of the West End theatres, and it was in Drury. No, it wasn't Drury Lane, not that year. I can see the theatre, but I can't remember its name. But it was packed. I can hardly imagine getting a theatre packed for a Warsaw Ghetto Memorial meeting today, but it was. I was about 17 and asked to make a choir. So I got some of my friends together, B'nai Kiva Nix. We sang some songs, and Chazan Hass was the Chazan. He was going to sing the memorial prayer, and he was going to do Kaddish. And I was already at Jews College. I remember thinking to myself, well, the memorial prayer, okay, I know you do it, but I wonder what Kaddish he's going to sing. What Kaddish would you sing at a memorial service? Is he going to sing Rosh Hashanah? I suppose that would be most appropriate. And he didn't sing it at all. He said it. And while I'm thinking of it now, the hairs are standing up on the back of my head. if you ever heard Chazan Hass, forgive me, I'm not going to try and imitate him, but to give you a vague idea, it was something like this. Yiskadal v'yiskadash, Shemei Rabbo. V'yom mod yivrochid usei, v'yom nichbach usei. I can still hear it. It was that was how powerful it was. Now that's the kind of artist Chazan Hass was when he was in his prime. He would just take your breath away. Unquestionably one of the finest Chazanim this country ever had. And please God, he should have many good, healthy, happy years still. Now, we've now finished this formal part of the program. I want to ask one question. I'm going to ask each person the same question. What was it like being the son of the Chazan? Just what was it like being the son, or in your case? Well, no, the son of the Chazan, son of the Chazan. What was it like? Who wants to start? Yeah, I'm going to ask you, not for 20 minutes, please, just a few sentences. Who wants to say? What was it like being on show and all that business? What do you reckon? What was it like for you?
It was great.
Speak into the mic, please.
That was a lovely experience. Yeah, it was really lovely. The davening and everything, listening to the davening.
Didn't bother you?
No, it didn't.
What about you?
It was great. It really was. I mean, you sort of felt that you were a little bit different to everybody else in the Kehillah. You were maybe just on a little slightly higher pedestal. But, growing up as a kid, it was a wonderful place to be. Growing up in shul was amazing. It really was. It was fabulous. It was just one big happy family.
I think it depends if you're a good boy or a naughty boy.
I was a very naughty boy.
If you're a good boy, thank God, I think I was okay as a child. It was a great opportunity to learn, great opportunity to do things. If it's a naughty boy, it wasn't so nice because you're the Chazan's son. But, I mean, yeah, it was fine.
What was it like for you?
Well, I was in a very, very English shul. Great Portland Street was the most English shul, I think, in the whole United Synagogue. We had about 16 lords, about 15 barons and baronets, and one personal experience I had was Sir Bernard Wady Cohen, Lord Mayor of London, in 1964, was given the seat next to my father, with the Dayanim seat. In the old shuls you had 3 seats on the side of the Chazan and 3 seats on the side of the Rov for visiting Dayanim and Rabbonim. And because he was Lord Mayor, Sir Bernard was given the seat next to my father that year in 64, 66. And I remember once I sat next to my father Yom Kippur that year. And Sir Bernard,
how old were you?
In 1964, I was 12.
Oh, young boy.
And Sir Bernard came in, and I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, Sir Bernard. Please." He said, "Oh no, you came here much earlier than I did." And he would not. He came in about 10 o'clock, and he was so proud because his family were the senior Kohanim of the United Synagogue. They'd been duchening since 1870 for the United Synagogue, the Wady Cohens. And he said, "No," he said, "you came here earlier." He said, "and God and myself would like you to always be sitting next to your father." And ever since then, while he was alive, he would never sit on his seat. He sat on the seat. These are great people. They're so modest when they come to shul, even though they're not particularly frum. They've got such derech eretz for everybody else, whether you're 12, 52, 82, chazan, rabbi, chief rabbi. You don't see these kind of people anymore.
It's interesting you to say that, because in the New West End, Lord Wolfe was a member of the shul.
Oh, yes, sure.
And remember, he was only recently, in the last 15 years, yeah. Lord Harry Wolfe was the highest layman in the country. He was the Lord Chancellor. The Chief Justice. Lord Chief Justice. Yeah. And when I came to the New West End, they were not wearing, people were being called up on Yom Kippur, nobody bothered what shoes they were wearing. It was actually beyond my comprehension. Yes. And I said, "God, come on, we can't have this." So they went out and they brought the shul a whole load of slippers. Now, Harry Wolfe comes to shul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, doesn't necessarily come all of it, but he comes there and they always call him up. And they were saying, "But you can't ask Harry Wolfe to take his shoes off and put on slippers." I said, I'm sorry, hard luck. And do you know what? Harry Wolf took his shoes off, put the slippers on. He came up and he was, exactly as Stuart said, an absolute mensch. A really, really charming, delightful man. Now, does anybody have a specific, you don't have to have, we don't need to sit here all night, but does anyone have a particular question they'd like to ask any of our... This is the Reverend Michael Binstock. If you don't know him, a wonderful friend of ours, who was cousin in Brixton, Palmer's Green,
St John's
Wood, Hull.
A quick anecdote, because Geoffrey and I organised a memorial service in 1985 for the late Moshe Korzer and Johnny Gluck, and it was a great success. We worked hard. We were very active on the Chazonim Association in those days, which was very, very active. And the concert took place in Riley Close. We both very much wanted Chazan Hass to take part, but he wasn't an easy man to pin down or get a commitment from. And we really didn't know. He wouldn't give an answer. We'll see. And we didn't know whether he was actually going to turn up, let alone sing, but he did turn up and he did sing. One of the pieces that I'd heard him sing many, many times before, it was just phenomenal. He brought the house down. And we raised a good sum of money, which went towards cancer research.
And kidney research, went to 2 places.
That's right, exactly.
I remember soon after the war when the Midnight Salichas started at Great Portland Street, and it was absolutely packed, standing room only. I think the police were controlling
sitting on the stairs. We used to sit on the stairs on the gangway.
Yes,
remember?
Yes, absolutely.
No health and safety in those days.
Fantastic. And all the balabatim of Anglo Jewry were there, and it was unforgettable, absolutely.
Thank you. Is anybody else? Okay, well, we do hope you've enjoyed the evening. I'd like to thank very much our guests here with us, Rabbi Shlomo Katanka, Nathan Gluck, Avi Landenberg, Stuart Hass. Now you can. Particularly like to thank, you haven't seen him, but Tony Honickberg is up there. He's done all this fantastic array of all this equipment. This evening will be on YouTube sometime on Tony's own website. If you weren't here last year and you would like to see that, that is already there. It's had about 900 hits already. So it was also a very nice evening. We do hope you've enjoyed it very much. It's been lovely to see you. We wish you all Ketiva v'chatima tova. Please God, you should have a wonderful, healthy, sweet New Year. And I invite you to join us next door for some refreshments.
Right. Could I just add 1 or 2 comments? When I introduced this evening, I said, may we all be inspired by our rich musical heritage, and I think we've been overwhelmed by what we've heard tonight. I'd like to thank Rabbi Shisler for getting all these chazanim together and organising the evening. We've heard some pieces which are not in the public domain, particularly from Reverend Katanka and Jay Landenberg, and of course they will now be on YouTube and everyone can hear them.
Gefühl de Hüse